The rape crop is varies in growth stage, but is generally still in a vegetative state. I have no rape that's actually starting to extend yet. So a leaf number anything from 5 up to 8 leaves or more. The canopies have kind of kept growing, and this is a slight concern at the moment, is with the lack of winter weather. The crop has continued to develop, and really the canopies are getting a little bit ahead of where you would like them to be. In terms of land operations, we're unable to get on with anything at the moment. We still have quite a backlog of spraying in this part of the world, particularly on the rape crop. The primary target at the moment is, as well as sort of getting up to date with propyzamide applications, is the concern about light leaf spot. So we're just looking closely at a plant of rape. You can see first of all cultivation's gone fairly well. Look at the root development, taproot development here. It's looking pretty good. One of the first things I've noticed, if you pull apart the leaf petiole here, you can see these little scars here are the entry points for cabbage stem flea beetle larvae. If we look in here, we'll probably find a tiny larvae. Not a lot we can do with this now. I mean, in theory, you'll notice the recommendations talk about using pyrethroids at this stage. My opinion is that they're pretty ineffective. There's the larvae there. But at this level, I'm not unduly concerned. Other issues, FOMA is starting to show. This is actually, the crop we're in at the moment is a sort of more resistant variety, but even here you can see here the remnants of some late autumn lesions coming through. Interestingly, they're not, despite the mild weather, they're not actually coming through onto the new foliage on this site. So that's, for me, quite encouraging, because most of these older leaves will die off, and as they separate from the stem, it'll stop the FOMA infection getting into the stem to cause cankers in the spring, which is sort of the primary route of yield loss with FOMA. Light leaf spot, not evident yet. There's no sign of light leaf spot yet, but that wouldn't deter me from putting a fungicide on preventatively, because that's really the best way to use fungicides for the control of light leaf spot. If you wait to see it, usually you've left it too long. And remember, that's the disease that's probably going to affect the yield more than any other. Oilseed rape's fairly intolerant of water. It's a crop that likes sort of aerobic conditions around the rooting zone. It'll stand a few days, but beyond sort of 4 or 5 days underwater, I think we're going to see some crop losses. The cereal crop's probably slightly more resilient, but again, anything more than a week underwater's slightly, is concerning. Here we are looking at our winter barley site here at Stokesley. Like most winter barley at the moment, it's looking surprisingly green, considering the amount of rainfall it's had on it, and the fact that we're now well into winter. I think the mild temperatures have a lot to do with this, and although we suspect soil mineral nitrogen levels aren't massive, because of the mild weather, mineralisation's been very efficient, and crops at the minute look quite healthy. My sort of thinking is that as we move forward into the spring, crops are quickly going to change, and I think they'll run out of nitrogen quite abruptly this year. So I think early nitrogen application, certainly onto the winter barley crop, will be very important. We're now in a crop of KWS Tower, which is a mildew susceptible variety. But actually on this site, as you can see, the foliage is reasonably clean. Yeah, it's looking good. The main issues agronomically for us at the moment are the lack of herbicide application on some crops, so we need to think about finishing off residual spraying when we can travel. This of course is very important in winter barley, because we haven't got the grassweed SU options that we have in winter wheat. Beyond that, and possibly less so on this site, but many crops, certainly more advanced crops, are hosting quite high levels of foliar disease, particularly mildew. We'll have to see what the winter does to this, but coming out of winter, you know, consideration of foliar disease is very important, because mildew in particular, but also Rinco and other foliar disease will affect the crop in terms of its grain development in the early stages of growth. So thinking ahead, we'll have to think about the T0 fungicide application closer to the time. Winter wheat generally is in the various stages of tillering. Even the sort of later crops now, this crop for example, drilled towards the end of September, is now sort of comfortably tillering away. The most advanced towards the end of tillering, but we have no wheat starting to extend yet. So I'm quite happy with the stage of growth, and the general plant populations of wheat are pretty good. The crop has established well generally, particularly the early sown crops, and I think the only problem area are some of the late sown crops drilled in marginal conditions where the land's got wet. In terms of chemical control of blackgrass, most of the really bad blackgrass sites we've had, you know, quite a robust residual program on. We've had a stack of chemical applied pre-em with and without Avadex, and we're looking when possible to get back onto any remaining blackgrass when we can travel with Atlantis type materials. Moving on to the disease control in the wheat, well, it's early days at the moment. There are reports certainly in the south and east of high levels of yellow rust. We in this region are not really seeing that, and that's partly because we've seen a big switch in varieties away from the high risk rust varieties, and partly climatic as well. But I think, as I say, we need to see what the winter brings before we rush around with fungicides at the moment, but certainly attention will be on the T0 as we get into probably early April for us in the northern region. In terms of looking forward, I think the big challenge for us again this year is going to be control of septoria, because this disease is really the biggest threat to wheat growing in the region. And a very difficult disease to control if we get that sort of very wet period through March and April. My view on the soil mineral nitrogen levels at the moment would be that I believe they are fairly low. I think the crops at the moment generally, and the countryside generally, looks quite green, but I think that's more a reflection of soil temperature than absolute nitrogen levels. So I think the soil temperatures are allowing, efficient mineralisation of nitrogen, and we're seeing a good spell of growth at the moment, but I suspect the crop will quickly run out of steam. The other aspect of last year, of course, was high yields, which have taken off high levels of nitrogen, along with phosphorus and potash as well. So I think attention to your base P and K applications this year. Please take account of the yield that you've taken off, and consider this when planning your P and K